Someone once told me that if I knew what was outside at night, I would never go outside at night ever again. Almost everyone has heard of Bigfoot or Sasquatch, but not many people have heard of the Dogman, which is a much more terrifying cryptid in my opinion. Even though Dogman encounters have been reported on every continent except Antarctica, and according to lore, the Dogman appears in 10-year cycles. Something that's interesting is that more Dogman encounters happen during the day than at night. It's really creepy, and sightings have even been reported in major cities. More than one eyewitness has reported seeing a Dogman in Central Park. The first known Dogman encounter was in 1887 in Wexford County, Michigan. Two lumberjacks were out in the woods when they saw a tall creature that had the body of a man and the head of a dog. That creature is now known as the Michigan Dogman. Descriptions of the Michigan Dogman vary, but it's usually described as having glowing amber or icy blue eyes, the head of a dog with fangs, and the body of a man. They can stand up on two legs and are somewhere between 6 to 10 feet tall. It's like a wolf on steroids. According to Vic Cundiff of Dogman Encounters, Dogman describes a group of more than one type of cryptid that's described as looking like a large, upright cryptid. The canine type of Dogman tends to be more aggressive and is described as having legs like a canine and a human head, while the type 3 Dogman is described as looking like a Sasquatch with a muzzle instead of having a flat face. Eyewitnesses who have encountered type 3s also report seeing claws on the tips of their fingers and their toes instead of fingernails and toenails like a Sasquatch would have. They often walk on their hind legs, which is obviously very creepy and unusual because wolves do not tend to walk that way unless something is wrong with their front legs. The Dogman is usually described as very muscular and fast, and they weigh about 400 to 500 pounds. They're between 7 to 9 feet tall on their hind legs while they're standing up, or 3 to 4 feet when they're on 4 legs. Their hind legs are bent backwards, and their feet leave tracks that are sometimes described as being similar to a dog's, only larger and more triangular in shape. Some say they are entirely covered in hair, while others say it looks like an actual man with a wolf's head, and its eyes are either glowing amber or icy blue, just like the Michigan Dogman that I mentioned. They're usually reported as having hands that are similar to ours, but with shorter, broader fingers. They tend to be seen deep in the woods around logging camps and on isolated roads late at night. They are sometimes spotted near large, freshly killed prey, like deer, and occasionally someone is attacked by a Dogman, but it is rare. Dogmanencounters.com says that almost every eyewitness who encountered a Dogman felt like they were about to die, but in almost every case the eyewitness walked away unharmed. While I was listening to Dogman Encounters on YouTube, something that I heard more than once was that the woods would become silent once the Dogman was nearby, and grown men that weren't usually afraid of anything were absolutely terrified. One man said he wet his pants. That's how afraid he was. They tend to bring out a primal fear. Another common thread in the encounters is that the person felt like they were being watched and they had a bad sense of dread. Now, Bigfoot can supposedly emit low-frequency sound waves, so maybe the Dogman can too. One night in Manistee, Michigan in 1986, Ray Greenway saw a pair of yellow eyes, but something wasn't right. They were high in the air and not where you would expect to see the eyes of a four-legged creature. Before he could get his wits about him, the thing ran towards him, and then it leaped clear across the road. He never saw it again, but the yellow eyes and the way that it leaped stayed with him. In Stokes County, North Carolina, in 2019, a woman's dogs were barking nonstop one night, so she grabbed her flashlight and went to see what the noise was about. At first, she didn't see anything that stood out until she started counting sets of eyes. She had 5 dogs, but she counted 6 sets of eyes. She counted again to double check, and this time there were only 5. As she was walking back to her house, she turned around to look one more time, and that's when she saw a set of orange eyes. It looked like One of the dogs was on top of its doghouse. When she walked towards the kennels to get a closer look, the eyes disappeared. Even though she thought it was strange, she went back inside and tried to forget about it. Later that night, around 2:30, she went outside to smoke, and she noticed how quiet it was. There weren't any dogs barking or any traffic sounds, so it was easy to hear the twigs snapping. She assumed it was a deer or just some type of wildlife because this was in the country. And she went to get a flashlight and a gun, and once she got about 30 feet from their tractor shed, she saw what was breaking the twigs, and she froze. It looked like a long-haired black German shepherd, but it was walking upright. Its head was even with the top of the post that was holding up the shed. It then dropped on all fours and started to run towards her. She said it smiled at her in a very menacing way. She shot at it, and then it was gone. She tried to wake her husband up, but he blew her off, and he said that she was acting like a raving maniac. She was terrified. So the next morning, she went to check things out, and she noticed that it had torn the wood off the bottom of the kennels, and there were deep claw marks all over the ground. And they put up a trail cam, but never got any pictures of what she saw that night. Now she avoids going outside much after dark unless there are a lot of people around. She said that her grandchildren are even afraid to stay there, so she tries to play it off and act like it's just a dog to avoid scaring them any further. And she says that they think a werewolf lives in the woods. Bucks County, Pennsylvania. One night, a man was on his way to work around 4 a.m. when he saw a large, dark brown figure that was about 30 feet off the road. It was about 4 feet tall and was sitting with its legs bent out in front of it. It had a wolf-like face, large pointed ears, and was leaning back on human-like arms. The man immediately felt like he was in danger, so he sped out of there. It took him a couple of years before he told anyone what he saw. He had a feeling that whatever it was going to catch up to his car and rip him out of it. The sighting made him paranoid, and his head was on a constant swivel that entire day. He still has a hard time driving past that location. And in 2010, a co-worker saw it when she was driving home on a country road around midnight. This was about 5 or so miles from where his sighting took place. She began to hear what sounded like something running beside her car. When she looked out the driver's side window, she saw what she thought was a werewolf. It was black and gray with large teeth, and it ran next to her car until she increased her speed to 45 or 50 miles per hour. Once she made it home, she ran inside, closed all of the curtains, and she did not sleep a wink that night. While driving on an isolated road in the Lansing, Michigan area in May 2006, a man named Ron slowed down for what he thought was a deer. All of a sudden, a human-like hand, except it was much larger than a normal man's hand, reached over the edge of the hill, and this huge silhouette came into view. It was much larger than a normal man, and it had a wolf-like face, and its eyes reflected in my headlights. It just sat there and looked across the field on the other side of the road, and then it just very calmly turned its head and looked right at me. In 1999, on a rainy night, an 18-year-old girl was driving down Bray Road when her right tire hit something, lifting it up off of the road. She stopped and got out to see what she had run over, but there wasn't anything there. She looked to the side of the road and she saw a massive wolf-like form standing on 2 legs. She rushed back into the car, and as she sped away, the creature jumped onto her trunk, but it slid off because of the rain, and she quickly drove home. Now let's talk about how dogmen differ from werewolves. A dogman is always a dogman. It was never human, while a werewolf is a shapeshifter, a human that transforms usually at night after being bitten by another werewolf or because of a curse. The belief in werewolves isn't new or strictly an American phenomenon. It actually developed around the same time as the belief in witches. A few hundred people were even accused of being werewolves during the Salem witch trials and during the French werewolf epidemic from 1520 to 1630. France had their own version of witch trials and executions, but with werewolves. For 110 years, 30,000 people were accused of mutilating and eating children, and they were tortured until they confessed. If they did not admit their guilt, they died at the stake. In Michigan, reports of such a creature have been traced to the 1794 journal of a French fur trader who described it as a loup-garou, which is French for werewolf. There is also a legend about a hunter in 1899 shooting a wolf, but finding a man dead of a gunshot wound at the end of a bloody trail. Prairie Road is a road in Elkhorn, Wisconsin, and it's where the beast of Prairie Road was first seen. Mark Shackleman was a school night watchman, and he was doing his nightly walk around when he saw a shadow out in a wide open field. Hunched over on all fours and digging into an Indian burial ground, it looked like a dog or maybe a wolf, but even from far away, he could see that it was too large to be either of those. Whatever it was, it had a hairy body and was over 6 feet tall. It had a shaggy dog-like face, but beneath the thick fur, it looked like a muscular man. And Mark also could smell rotting meat. As he stepped back, the creature turned and ran off into the trees and was gone. The next night, he returned to do his rounds, and as he walked the fields, he saw that shadow again, and it was digging in the same mound as the night before. Mark gripped his flashlight, and he watched as it stood up, but this time, it opened its mouth, and he saw fangs, and it even growled at him. He said the noise that it made was half human and half beast. The creature then turned and left. He never saw it again, but the growl and the way it seemed to speak to him stuck in his mind for years afterward. In 1878, 624 deaths by wolves were reported throughout the rural areas of Uttar Pradesh, India. Men would stay awake all night keeping vigil while mothers kept their children inside all day. These wolves were attacking people in broad daylight, and they mostly targeted the vulnerable, like infants, young children, or women. The wolves themselves seemed fearless, and because of this fearlessness, rumors began to spread that these weren't normal wolves, but rather supernatural werewolves. The creatures were described as half man, half wolf, and there were even reports of men transformed into wolves. The rumors spread so quickly that there were werewolves in the village that officials tried their best to convince everyone that the wolves were just that, wolves, and that they were attacking people because they were starving or they were sick. Something was obviously upsetting the natural instinct of wolves to avoid humans, but the people in the village didn't believe the officials that easily. Now fast forward to 1996, the attacks began again. One wolf pounced on a woman and 3 of her children in a grassy clearing at the edge of the village as they were using the ground for a toilet. The animal, that was described as 100 pounds and muscular, grabbed her smallest child, a 4-year-old boy, and carried him away by the neck. When a police search party found him 3 days later, he was half a mile away, and all that remained was his head. From the claw and tooth marks, pathologists confirmed he had been killed by a wolf, probably one of a pack that conservationists believed was in the area. A sister of the boy said, "It came across the grass on all fours, and as it grabbed my brother, it rose onto 2 legs until it was as tall as a man. Then it threw him over its shoulder. It was wearing a black coat, a helmet, and goggles." Her grandfather said, "As long as officials pressure us to say it was a wolf, we'll say it was a wolf. But we have seen this thing with our own eyes. It is not a wolf. It is a human being." A lot of people believe the government knows that dogmen exist and that they are doing whatever they need to cover up any and all evidence of their existence. I did a story about Mrs. Brenda Hamilton, and there are a great deal of people that believe she was killed by a dogman and that it's being covered up. Vic Cundiff says most eyewitnesses who possess that kind of evidence don't want it released to the public. Amazing videos, pictures, and vocals of dogmen have all been shared with me. Impressive dogman evidence most definitely does exist. But what do you believe?